It's talking about fighting our battles for us, the Lord being there for us, and that's actually what we're going to talk about tonight. So the provision that God makes for His people, and that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. If you would, take your Bibles and turn to Genesis chapter number 22, and we'll get started there this evening. Genesis chapter number 22. Genesis chapter number 22, and we'll be starting in verse number 1. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham, and said unto him, Abraham. And he said, Behold, here am I. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac, whom thou lovest, and get thee into the land of Moriah, and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. And Abraham rose up early in the morning, and saddled his ass, and took 2 of his young men with him, and Isaac his son, and clave the wood for the burnt offering, and rose up and went unto the place which God had told him. Then on the third day Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place afar off. And Abraham said unto his young men, Abide here with the ass, and I and the lad will go yonder and worship, and come again unto you. And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it upon Isaac his son. And he took the fire in his hand and the knife, and they went both of them together. And Isaac spake unto Abraham his father, and said, My father. And he said, Here am I, my son. And he said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, My son, God will provide himself a lamb for a burnt offering. So they went both of them together. I'll point out something about verse number 8 right there. It says, God will provide himself a lamb. These new versions will take out that and put in, God will provide for himself a lamb. But we see here it says, God will provide himself a lamb. We know what the end result of that is. We know that God did provide himself as a lamb. Verse number 9, And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven, and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here am I. And he said, Lay not thine hand upon the lad, neither do thou anything unto him. For now I know that thou fearest God, seeing thou hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him a ram caught in the thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered him up for a burnt offering in the stead of his son. And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah-Jireh, and it is said to this day, In the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. That phrase Jehovah-Jireh, he's talking about that God has provided or God has seen to the situation there. In our text, we see that Abraham is climbing undoubtedly the toughest hill that he will ever climb. This hill that he's climbing, that he's been sent to, is a hill obviously of surrender and of sacrifice. We're going to look at a few things tonight on the basis of the provision of God. The spiritual and emotional height that Abraham is about to reach, this is a high place. We'll talk about the depth more in a moment, but this portion of Scripture that we just read, this is the account where Abraham is commanded to take his son and sacrifice him to God. I thought about this. Most mountain climbers, before they ever try to climb Mount Everest, they try to climb some smaller stuff, you know. They're not going to go for the big thing first. They're going to obviously have to have some of that training from some of the smaller mountains before they climb the big mountain. All right? Abraham is no different. We can see through reading the pattern of his life. He's climbed several mountains to get to this point, 3 of which, first of all, is when God told him to leave Ur of the Chaldees. He told him to leave everything he knew and get out of that place and just go until you get to the place where I tell you of that I want you to settle in. That was his first mountain he had to climb. He climbed it. He conquered that. He succeeded in doing that. He obeyed in doing that. The second was he had a son named Ishmael, and God told Abraham to kick out the bondwoman and Ishmael, and he did that. That's obviously a hurdle. If we really put our mind in the situation, these are real hurdles that he had to get through, the real hills that he had to climb. Obviously, compared to the last one that we're reading about in Genesis 22, they were relatively smaller hills. And then the last, he had to choose the less fertile ground over that of the well-watered plains of Sodom and Gomorrah. He chose that less fertile ground, and God blessed him for the decision that he made in doing that. But he climbed those mountains. He succeeded. He obeyed in doing those things which God had told him to do. And those smaller mountains, if we'll keep this in the back of our mind through us going through this passage tonight, those smaller mountains were preparatory mountains to this mountain that he's at in Genesis 22 that we just read of. Those were in preparation of this one here, the big one, the Everest, if you will. So here in our passage, God is about to test Abraham. Just a side note, God only tries those he can trust. Let's also keep that in our mind. I don't find in my Bible where God ever tested or tried Lot. All right, we know that Lot was a carnal individual. All right, I don't find in my Bible where God ever tested him to the extent, obviously, that we see here of that of Abraham. All right, first of all, Abraham's instructions. All right, we know that God told Abraham he wanted Abraham to take that promised child, that promised seed, and kill him. All right, that's a huge, unimaginable thing to be commanded to do. This hill that he is proverbially he's starting to climb up. This is a rough situation. I mean, it is. Even though it was commanded by God, even though God has his hand in the situation and on the situation, this is a rough deal. This is a rough deal. This trip that he has embarked on is a trip of pain. It's full of pain, heartache, pain, the proving that he's having to do, the proving of his faith, and of personal sacrifice. There's a lot that is going into this trip, and this is, if you really put your mind into that, that's an enormous task that I really cannot enter into. But the journey, it takes 3 days to get there. That's what the Bible tells us. It takes 3 days to get there. 3 days of Abraham riding on that donkey, trying to get to where he's going, to where God has told him to go. I can't imagine what's going through his head. You know, God has just told him, to sacrifice his son. And, I'm through my thinking and studying, the first day, I could only imagine, just say we'll go from this side of the room to the other. The first day, they enter into their trip, they start out and they get to the first spot. I couldn't imagine that night. Everybody's asleep, and Isaac wakes up, he looks across the fire at Abraham, his father, and Abraham's wide awake, staring into the fire. Obviously, the Bible does not say this. I'm just thinking, using my imagination. I'm sure that's probably, there was something, some form of truth probably in what I'm saying that actually probably happened. But he probably looked across the fire at his father, and his father was probably sitting there wide awake. I can only imagine if I was in that situation, I'd be wide awake too. I wouldn't be able to sleep, and he's probably crying and praying. All right, and Isaac probably asked him, Father, what's wrong? What is there something going on? Is something wrong? No, boy, just going back to sleep. I'm fine. That second night, it's probably getting a little more real. I mean, he started. He's got the first night under his belt. He's on the second night. His face is probably in the dirt, begging God. Asking him why. Why is this happening? Why is this my lot per se? But why am I having to do this? Lord, if there's any other way, that I could accomplish what you want done, I'd probably do it, So that second night, I see the intensity getting greater along that journey. And it says in the Bible, they just say this is our hill. It says in the Bible that Abraham saw the place far off. And he finally gets to that place where he can see that hill that he's supposed to go on top of and kill his son. And I believe that it was already an immense situation, but I believe at that point in time, that's when his heart finally dropped down to his stomach, and it got real. Because he saw the place where he was going to have to climb up to the top of, and he was going to have to kill and burn his son for that sacrifice. But they got to that place, and he told the fellows to stay there with the donkey. And see, Abraham, he had the fire, Isaac had the wood, and they started up this side of the mountain. And I'm sure every single step he took up side of that hill, sorry, y'all are sparse. I'm having to like look around, but I'm sure every step that he took going up side of that hill was just killing him inside. I could only imagine, because he knows what he's going to have to do. If he wants to be obedient to God, he knows what he's going to have to do when he gets to the top of that hill. I could not enter into that. And every step he's taking, he's thinking about what he's going to have to do. All right, and through this, I could only imagine that through him stepping and walking up the side of that mountain to where he's supposed to go, I could only imagine that the devil was in his ear the entire time telling him that God does not know where he's at, God does not care where he's at, God does not know what he's going through. If anything, God would know the best out of anyone what he's going through, because he knew in time his son was going to be walking up a hill. It was going to be a rough go carrying a pile of wood. God knew that in foretime, but obviously, like I said, it does not say in the Bible, the devil came unto Abraham and, was this, that, and the other. But I can only imagine us living our daily lives, we know what happens. We know when we get in a tough spot, we know, the devil starts trying to spit stuff in our ear and tell us how God does not care. Where's your God at now? That kind of mockery. We've heard of that before. We know what's going on there. I could only imagine, like I said, we'll get past this introduction in a moment, but I can only imagine as they're going up that hill, and no doubt probably the devil's probably in Abraham's ear, speaking all these things to him. God does not know where you're at. And then Isaac turns around to him and asks him, I see the fire, I see the wood, but where's that lamb? Where's the lamb for the burnt offering? I could not imagine as a parent, but Abraham, by faith, he tells him God will provide himself a lamb. In what we're going through tonight, keep in mind, obviously, the situations you go through in life. That's the whole principle of this. The situations you go through in life. When you're walking up this side of the hill, it's a rough go. This year, I cannot tell you, but this year has just been absolutely, I don't even have a word for it. It's just been rough. Starting off this year, we're ready to hit it, it's a brand new year, Then January comes, and it starts going downhill. February comes, goes downhill a little further, and then it just keeps rolling. This year for us and our family, it's been a rough one. But when we're climbing up that hill, that rough go that we've got, I'm glad that when we're in that predicament and when we're in that situation and we're trying to be obedient to God, we're trying to follow God and where He has us going to the top of that hill, I'm glad that we can count on in every situation that when we're going up that side of the hill, on this other side of the hill, oh, by the way, when you're on that side of the hill, you can't see this side of the hill. When you're on one side, you can't see the other. But I'm glad when we're going up that rough side that God has His provision, that He's done, spoke, and put in motion going up the other side of the hill. All right, so we're talking about tonight the provision of God. He's going up this rough side. He can't see this side, but God's already got something put in motion. It's kind of, I was teaching a couple weeks ago and kind of hit on this where God had already had something put in motion long before it actually came to pass and Israel was delivered. He raised up that man. So anyway, the same principle there, that provision. But we can't see that other side of the hill. But like I said, our application tonight, somebody I'm sure in here or watching online, somebody is going, they're making their way up this side of the hill. They're going up that rough side of the hill and they can't see this other side. It could be me tomorrow. We've had a rough year so far, but I ain't up here to talk about me. But somebody in here is probably going up that rough side of the hill. All right, and if I'm not as of right now, I will be soon probably. But the situation that we have to go through and climb, that situation that we've been, per se, placed in. God has prepared us for that climb. All right, we don't understand when we're coming up that side of the hill. We don't understand. We're worrying. We're fretting. We don't know where God's at. We're praying. We're not really getting an answer. When we come up outside of the hill, that's a rough side. That's a rough side. That's the heart sinking, gut wrenching. That's the side you don't know what's at the top. And in your mind, if you're thinking about it this way, you don't really know if there is something coming up the other side of the hill. But through reading this and through just personal experience, I can tell you, this is the key, if you're obedient, God's got His provision in place coming up the other side of that hill. And that's what I want to take a look at tonight. And God has already worked out what you're worried about. So, anyway, how do we see God's provision? All right, first of all, we got to learn to follow directions. We got to learn to follow directions, and this is right out of the book. First of all, in verse number 2, at the end of the verse, upon one of the mountains which I will tell thee of. That's God talking to Abraham. God says, I will tell you where I want you, when. All right? And see verse number, I believe it's 3. At the end of verse number 3, and Abraham went unto the place which God had told him. So we see that God tells him to do something. We see direct obedience right on the backside of that. There has to be obedience in the Christian's life to find yourself in that position, in that place, to find provision from God. And down in verse number 9, at the very first of verse number 9, and they came to the place which God had told him of. So there's that obedience again. It's mentioned 3 different times. God told it, and it's mentioned twice that they got to the place that God told them of, or God told him of. So there's got to be obedience there if we want to see the provision or the purpose that God has for us. Abraham could have said, that's a mountain. I'll climb that, not this one. I'll go over there to that mountain. God's provision is not going to be on the mountain that you choose. There's plenty of people, Christians that they have their own purpose in life. They have their own goal. They have their own this, that, and the other that they want to see achieved in their own life. They're living a life of no surrender and no sacrifice. Then they get to the place that they think that they've finally arrived at, and then they're like, all right, God, go ahead and provide. Go ahead. Provide, this or that, whatever. Or their prayers are not getting answered, this or that, the other. They're not on the right hill. They picked their own hill. And if Abraham would have picked his own hill in this situation, his provision would not have been coming up that other side. It took obedience to get that provision that God had for Abraham. All right. And behind that, look who's following you. In my situation, we've got 2 girls following us, looking for us to be obedient. Through our obedience, God's provision being there in our life. And if we're not obedient, they're going to see that. And ultimately, they're probably going to fall by the wayside because of that. They're going to think, well, if Mom and Daddy wasn't obedient, then I ain't got to be obedient. But through us being obedient, they can see the provision that God does have for them through their obedience. So look who's following behind you. Second of all, we have to have faith in the director. All right. If we don't have faith in the director, all right, if you don't have, it's kind of hard to follow directions if you don't have faith in the person who's giving them to you. It's like if you using somebody who don't really know much about where they're at or directions in general, or you use a GPS. I mean, you might not have as much faith in the person who's like, don't really know where they're at half the time versus the GPS. So you see what I'm saying about that. But it's kind of hard to have faith in someone who does not really have the confidence to give those directions. Let's turn to the book of Hebrews right quick. We'll look at one more thing about Abraham, and we'll continue on. We're going to the Hall of Faith, so that's Hebrews chapter number 11. It takes up a good portion of chapter number 11. We're going to chapter number 11, verse number 17 through 19. Hebrews chapter number 11, verse number 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, And when he had received the promises, offered up his only begotten son, of whom it was said that in Isaac shall thy seed be called, accounting that God was able to raise him up even from the dead. So Abraham's saying through this, I have faith in my director, the one that's leading me. I have faith in the director. That word accounting, Abraham's pretty much saying, even if I do kill Isaac, I have enough faith in my director that even if I do kill him, my director can raise him up again from the dead. That's what he's saying in verse number 19. Accounting that God was able. He believes that God's able. His director is able to raise him up even from the dead. I believe through Abraham's mountains, like we mentioned earlier and talked about, I believe that through his mountains, he learned to trust God. That song comes to mind, through it all. I've learned to trust in Jesus. I've learned to trust in God. Through it all, through these mountains that I've been one to another, bouncing from mountain to mountain to mountain through my life, I've learned to trust in the Lord for the provision through my obedience. But he has faith in his director. Like we talked about the devil talking in his ear. Through this entire thing, it's already a rough go. But then the devil probably speaking lies into his ear on top of that, trying to diminish that faith that he had in his director. Evidently, he did not succeed at. He might have tried to chip away a little bit, but we see that this was a determined man, and this is what we're going to touch on here in just a moment. Thirdly, being faithful, fulfilling the demands of God. We are to be faithful, fulfilling the things that God has told us to do. And these are, like I said, just some points just pointed out of our text here. In the book of Genesis, so back in the book of Genesis chapter 22, where we're at earlier in our text verse. Genesis chapter number 22, in verse number 9. Verse number 9. And they came to the place which God had told him of, and Abraham built an altar there, and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar upon the wood. And Abraham stretched forth his hand, and took the knife to slay his son. Abraham was going all the way. He wasn't going halfway and turning around and come back. He was already 3 days into his journey, and then however much time it took, I guess on that third day, to climb that mountain, all right, he was not turning back. All right, and per se, he had the knife in there. We know he picked it up. And I mean, if you pick it up, it's up off of something. I mean, he had it up off of something, but he had the knife up, and we were talking about his determination. He did not turn around halfway. He made it to the top, and he picked up the knife. In verse number 11, we're going to read that just for a moment. And the angel of the Lord called unto him out of heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, here am I. There's that obedience once again. Here am I. The determination that I saw through studying and reading this, not only did he get to the top, not only did he bind his son, and not only did he pick up the knife, all right, but if we read the text again, God called his name one time to get him started. But God had to call his name 2 times to get him to stop. After he's picked up his knife, God has called his name twice to get him to stop. That to me, I don't know the setting. I wasn't there listening. You know what I'm saying? But that to me shows a determination. He was determined to do what God had for him to do and to do the will of God. But he had to call his name twice to get him to stop. So how do we see the provision of God? First of all, obviously, we know it takes obedience, that following of directions. Y'all, this is going to be short tonight. It's going to take that following of directions. All right, we've got to follow the directions and go to the hill that we were called to be on, to go to the hill that he told us to be on. Not this way over here out in the world somewhere doing our own thing, but that hill that he's called us to be on. We've got to be on that hill. Secondly, having faith in our director. We are to grow in faith in the Word of God. But having faith in our director, it also comes through going where you're supposed to, going through the motions of the obedience that, wherever He's called us to be at or called us to do, going through those motions of obedience to God is going to strengthen our faith in our director. All right, because every single time we go through that, He's going to show us that obviously His purpose. We're going to see on the backside of that His purpose in what He was doing, in the provision that He had made through that situation, as we see here in the text. Obviously, we see about the ram that was caught in the thicket. Now, I don't know. I was just talking about the hill. I don't really know what side of the hill the ram come up on, but I do know that God sent that ram up one side of the hill, and it was obviously where Abraham could not see, or it'd probably be recorded. But having faith in our director, that obedience is going to increase that faith. But being faithful and devoted to fulfilling the things that God has us to do. Like I said, Abraham did not stop at, first of all, going up the hill. He didn't stop at binding his son and throw him on the wood. Well, not throwing him. I know, that's a son. Even though he was about to kill him, I don't think he threw him. But he laid him on that wood. Like I said, I cannot imagine entering into the mindset of having to kill your child, much less on top of that knowing that you've got to burn your child, and the sight that would end up being, and just the horror of thinking through that in your mind of what you're about to do or what you're about to witness. But the determination that he had to go all the way and to do what God had for him to do, that's incredible. That's incredible. It's already a feat walking up that rough side of the hill, but to actually get up there and be ready to accomplish what God has for you, that's incredible. One thing that I thought of through studying this out, I struggled for several years with the call to preach. I was apprehensive about it. I didn't know, I didn't want to go forward and it not be the will of God, but I also didn't want to sit for years and years and not go forward without a definite confirmation. But the hill that he had me to climb through that, obviously, that's a relatively small hill, all right. But I was still apprehensive about it. So I'm not negating the small things in our lives that are hills in our life, but those small things, I don't know what he's going to have us doing years down the road, but these things, just like tonight, preaching tonight, the second time I've ever preached, still don't half know what I'm doing. I'm just trying, but it's another hill. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to grow. I'm still apprehensive about it, but this is a hill that he's called me and our family to, and we expect to keep pushing forward, and we're determined to do whatever he would have us to do. So even the small things, but the obedience in the small things, even as we see in Abraham's life, the obedience in the small things is what led to this big thing. Now, it was heartbreaking for Abraham, but he saw the provision of God, and that increased his faith through it. But he was faithful and devoted to do what God had called him to do. I would encourage us, obviously, all of us are going through something. Small hill, big hill, all of us are going through something, and if we're not, we're going to be. But I would encourage us to make the decision to stick around. When you start up the hill, when you see what's coming, you already see the situation almost unfolding in front of you. You see that it's going to be a rough go at it. I would just like to encourage you to stick with it, to keep going up that hill, no matter how hard it gets. And just remember this, but to keep trudging up that hill and be determined and devoted to whatever God has called you to go through in your life. I know we've all been through, some of y'all, much worse things than I've been through, but we've all been through those heavy, hard, rough times in our life. But I would just like to be an encouragement about the hill and us not being able to see on the other side. We know that we can trust in our director, and we know that he's got something on the other side of that we're going to eventually see. We're going to eventually see it. Some people, it might be towards the end of their life, and they're thinking, this might be there's a song about that or something, but they're talking about this might be the last hill I have to climb. This might be the last hurdle I have to go through, the last pain I have to experience before I get to that other side. Boy, even for the saved Christian who's going up this hill, per se, of death, this hill of death. There's still provision after death. There's still the provision there at death when you die. I mean, I'm grateful for it because we're saved. But there's still provision there on the backside of that where he's promised us an eternity in heaven with him. So he's still provided, even through death, even through the, per se, the worst case scenario that we die. He's still got a provision there on the other side of that hill. So no matter what hill we're facing, no matter what hill we're trudging up the bad side of, I believe we can be confident in our director that there is a provision that he's already placed in order that's coming up the other side of that hill. Obviously, we can't see it, but eventually, you know how it clicks. At the end, you know, you finally get to the top, everything kind of seems resolved, you know, it's starting to resolve itself. It finally clicks, and you understand what God has put in motion. That hindsight 2020 kind of thing. You know, you see finally what God had put in motion long before you ever got to the top of that hill and met it. But anyway, like I said, I taught a little bit about that, and literally, God had the preparation made. I'm sure this man was not young, but he had the preparation made to deliver Israel from the hands of Moab. Just say 16, or the Bible does not tell us, but just say 16 or 18 years prior. So all this time that Israel thought that, you know, God's not listening to us, you know, we don't know where he's at, you know, this, that, and the other. Even through those times, even through their disobedience, that hits hard. Even through their disobedience and not doing what they were supposed to do, God was still raising them up a provision, a deliverer, to deliver the people from the hands of Moab. And that's also what he done for us. The provision, like I said, you know, the provision of just say the worst possible thing, which you know, death. But we've also got that provision for our sin. And I'm very, very thankful for that. I was listening to a song coming over here, come on the radio. It was talking about I've been sent. Pretty much, I've been sent to tell you he's alive. All right, without him being alive, we just celebrated Easter, but without him being alive, we don't have that hope. We don't have that proof in that hope of salvation or of eternity. But I'm thankful for that provision that he made, and he knew aforetime that he was going to end up sending his son up that hill with a load of wood on his back for us. And I reread through that provision that we're talking about, through him sending his son, I reread Psalm 22 that preacher was talking about his bones were looking upon him. Man, that really paints a gruesome picture, and much like a picture I believe that was painted probably in Abraham's mind when he knew he was going to have to kill his son and burn him. That paints a gruesome, horrific picture. But I'm thankful for the provision of God. I'm thankful that through any and every situation that he has us go through, I'm thankful that there is a provision that he has put in motion on the other side of that hill, where we can trust and keep following him up that side of the hill that we're in motion on that journey. As we keep going up, you can rest in the fact that he knows how to take care of you, that you have faith in him as a director, because all the other hills that you've been on in the past, that's built up your faith. But I'm thankful that on the other side of that hill that he does have a provision coming up that other side. So like I said, it's going to be short tonight. Y'all can stand. Miss Stephanie, you can come for just a moment. Like I said, how do we see the provision of God? First of all, following directions, having faith in the director, and being faithful and devoted and fulfilling the things of God. I pray that tonight, you know, we would make the decision, and I hope this has been some sort of encouragement. But I pray that we'd make the decision to stick around as we're going up that hill, to stay with the stuff, to continue in the battle that we've started, in the hill that we've started to climb. If you need to come, you go ahead and come. We'll just take a moment. But I pray that it's been an encouragement. If you are on the hill, to have that provision that God has placed on the other side of that. If you need to come, and we'll just play one more verse, and we'll go on to the house.